Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on COVID-19 learning loss in our schools. I'm Steve Kaufman, president and editor of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I'm joined today by fellow moderator Silas Allen, who's an education reporter here at the Star-Telegram. Silas has been writing about the effects of COVID-19 in Fort Worth. We're honored to have a distinguished panel with us today to examine this issue from a variety of perspectives. Our panelists are Dr. Elizabeth Brands, who is the head of education giving at the Morris Foundation here in Fort Worth and executive director of Read Fort Worth. Dr. Frank Hernandez, he's the dean of the College of Education at Texas Christian University. Parvinder Singh, he's a chemistry teacher and head of the science department at Juan Seguin High School in Arlington. And Margaret Spellings, she's the president and CEO of Texas 2036 and a former U.S. Secretary of Education. Our goal today is to define the challenges associated with the disruption COVID-19 has caused to learning in our schools, to get an idea of the scale of the problems, and most importantly, to talk about the path forward. And I'd like you to be part of the discussion as well. You can do that by submitting questions. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can do it through the chat functions there, the comment functions. If you're watching on startelegram.com, there's a Google form in the story with this live stream where you can submit questions. We'll watch for those and get to as many as we can. To get us started, I think it would be helpful to hear from each of our panelists, speaking from their unique perspectives and vantage points about what concerns them most from a big picture perspective about the effects of the pandemic on our public education systems. Secretary Spellings, welcome, and we'll start with you. You're muted, Secretary Spellings, I think.
They told me I didn't need to unmute myself, but now I am, I hope. Okay.
Sorry about that. This is the world today, right?
Okay, exactly. Well, first of all, thanks to you and the Star-Telegram for sponsoring this timely event. So timely, in fact, that we have some new data out just this afternoon from the Texas Education Agency, which really states what we all feared, and that is that our students have lost ground this year, especially in math. For our 8th graders in math, the failure rates have about doubled. Retreats in reading also, but less chronic. Not that we take any joy in that. Our passage rates are pretty low. And I guess one of the things that I want to make sure I leave with listeners is that we darn sure do not need to eliminate assessment and accountability and transparency. We need to care enough to find out, even though we don't like what we might hear and see. A few other broader observations are, of course, we have seen how essential the full functioning of our schools are to our society, to our economy, to our families. And I think there's renewed and appropriate appreciation for our educators and all they bring to our communities, whether it's, of course, learning, but food services and emotional support and collegiality with peers and on and on. This has been a hard year for teachers, no doubt about it, some of whom are making, existential decisions about whether they really want to be in the classroom, and that will have important implications for our state and the workforce that serves our communities and our students. And then from the parent point of view, I would say that parents are often smarter about how their students are doing since they've been sitting with them doing homeschooling and online education for many months. Getting a report card home in a backpack is a lot easier than seeing up close and personal that, wow, your kid can't read very well. And so that has been both encouraging and discouraging, of course. And then last, I would say that, of course, we have made more progress in broadband and tech learning and technology and proliferation around that kind of innovation in the last year or 18 months than we have made in the last, 18 years prior to that, I would believe. So anyway, again, thank you for the opportunity to be with this august group and for your focus on this timely topic.
Thank you, Secretary Spellings. Dr. Hernandez, talk about your major concerns from your position at TCU.
Yeah, there's a couple of ongoing concerns that I have been thinking about lately. One of them is we have 20,000 brand new Texas teachers who are going to start in the fall. Many of them have spent little to no time in an actual classroom with students. They've been training virtually. And the concern is, who is going to be paying attention to those teachers? What responsibilities does the educator preparation program have to support them? What responsibilities does our policymakers have to make sure that they're getting their needs met? And then our school districts, how will we identify them to make sure that they're getting the support so that we don't lose them and we give them the support and the instructional support that they need? I think the other sort of big picture concern that I have is that we're all rushing to solutions. School districts are doing one thing, nonprofits, the philanthropy community, schools and colleges of education, and our policymakers. Let's try to come together and think about solutions together so that we can get behind a vision for our communities and our city for how we can move forward and really turn the corner on COVID, but turn the corner on instruction and support that our families need. Think about, where do these new ideas come from? How can we cross-pollinate? How can we think about economies of scale so that we're not stepping over each other's feet in trying to do this work, but we're coming together to do it together with a clear vision, one that everyone understands, but one that we can't do alone, that we have to do together. So those are the two areas that are ongoing concerns for me.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Let's move to Dr. Brands from your position at the Morris Foundation, which does a lot of support for education in our community, and then the Read Fort Worth program. Major concerns you see here.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having me today with this esteemed group of education experts across our state. And I'll echo the comments made previously. It is our perspective that this is going to be everybody's responsibility to step up and to support our kids and families as we come out stronger, hopefully, on the other side of this global pandemic. One of the things that is especially on my mind as we think about summer and returning to school strong fall is how, as a state of Texas, we have not historically been great at catching up our failing students. Historically, as a state, kids that are failing in the earliest grades of 3rd and 4th grade in literacy and math in particular, approximately 4 or 5% of them ever catch up to grade level standards within the next couple of years of their academic trajectory. And these are pre-COVID numbers that we are looking at, which suggests that the things we have done before haven't always been successful. And we are on the precipice of an unprecedented time in our nation's education history, where there are more federal dollars coming to our school system than we have ever seen in the history of education. And how can we take this opportunity to make sure that we are scaling what we know works, that we are putting in new solutions that are evidence-based, and making sure that we are coming out on the other side of this stronger for our kids and families than ever before.
Thank you, Dr. Brands. And Mr. Singh, let's switch to you from what's a very important perspective, the people in the classroom. As a chemistry teacher and head of the science department, what are the major concerns you see from your perspective and or what you hear from your colleagues?
I also wanted to say, it's an honor to be a part of this panel with a lot of great faces here. Really two things. The first is the actual learning loss itself. I hope that it's something that everyone takes into consideration at all levels, especially testing. So with AP chemistry, my class is contingent on them learning certain things in pre-AP chemistry, but as we've kind of seen, there is learning loss. And so for me to overcompensate in AP, but for the assessments to be at a level that doesn't take any of that into consideration might be a little detrimental and unfair on the student end. And so definitely the learning loss that we're going to have to double up on there. In keeping the students' mental health in consideration as well with all of this, it's not that, okay, they've now all of a sudden they're behind in learning and now we just have to double, triple up on whatever it is that they've missed out on without taking into account, okay, they've been in one kind of a setting for so long and now all of a sudden they're switching into another one. We need to really take that into consideration. And that piggybacks into the second thing I was going to talk about, which is classroom management. And so it was just mentioned earlier how there's going to be so many first year teachers. Well, a lot of the students haven't been back in the classroom in about 2 years. So for instance, the freshmen we're going to be having, they haven't been in the classroom since 7th grade. The sophomores we'll be having haven't been in the classroom since 8th grade, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of them, it's going to be almost as if, and I mean, this is probably going to be the case. I'm not entirely sure. We'll have to see when it happens. But they've been in that home confined setting, and then they're going to be in this classroom setting back in the school, and they, they might have a little bit of an adjustment of what it means to be a student. And so that's something I think we need to be very mindful of.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Mr. Singh. And before we jump ahead to the next question, we did have a reader comment, and Secretary Spellings, I'm not sure I'm going to give a stab and so whether you might be able to answer this. The question from Bill Kohler asks, were assessments administered to elementary school students in order to determine their current grade level of learning and reading, math, and science? And I presume he means coming into this last school year. Do you, Secretary Spellings, on that one or any others?
Or if he means the data that we've just seen, that just came out that I cited, that would be a look back. So when you finish the third grade, you take a test to ascertain, how much progress you made that year. Obviously, the flip of that is we know, are you ready for the fourth grade or not? And so our Texas tests are designed around the curriculum standards for each grade, given at a time when we have a look back to see if those skills have been mastered.
Great, and thank you, Bill, for that question. Moving ahead, we've heard kind of the enormity of this problem from your various perspectives. Talk about what's at stake for, not just our students in our schools, but for our communities in terms of the health of our communities. Dr. Brands, what's that look like here in Fort Worth?
Yeah, this is certainly, education has always been an economic development and workforce issue. By some estimates, we look at county data to show that kids without a high school diploma can cost our society almost $260,000 in lost earnings and taxes and productivity over the course of their lifetime. And so it certainly has implications not only for this current moment in time, but the future prosperity of our counties in Texas and our state as well. And so those are some of the pieces that we are looking at as we think about kind of what is the implications of this current moment. I think the other thing, too, that is really important to note is really the historic and unprecedented amount of energy and time that has been spent in trying to hear from the various different stakeholder groups that are on the receiving end of what is coming down the pipeline. Time spent in teacher focus groups that we have heard about across the state, or student surveys, and really hearing from that constituent group that we are looking to be responsive to what it is that they are needing. And one of the things that has been most striking to me that I think we cannot ignore as a state is when we are hearing from our students that one of the top two things they are looking for when they return to classrooms this fall are mental health supports. And again, I just cannot highlight enough from my previous days as a classroom teacher, from my time working in school districts across multiple states, that when you hear that kind of feedback from our students, we have to be responsive to that, as these are our young children and the future prosperity of Texas that are calling out to us and asking for this specific support.
Thank you. And Secretary Spellings, does that what's at stake question, in terms of our community, does that look different at the state level, or is it just on a larger scale?
No, absolutely. The whole thesis for Texas 2036 is about the future of Texas, and nowhere is that more profound than our people. The coin of the realm for competitiveness in our country and our world is how well will we develop the potential of our people. And we have a lot going for us in Texas. We're big, we're young, and we're growing. And so amazing potential, but we need to make sure that it is supported and nurtured. And while we pay attention to issues like mental health, and rightly so, and garner the incredible level of resources that we have, historic levels of resources, not only from the federal government, which that's true, but a legislature that has just fulfilled the very substantial commitments to House Bill 3. We adults who care so much about education need to telegraph that we are about the potential, the promise, the doability, and the challenge before us that we will meet. That we not talk about kind of the half-empty woe down, but that we want to accelerate and triage and have our students really rise to the occasion. I worry that not only are we I worry that we're asking too little of our students, not too much. We have to have confidence in them, and if we don't, then I think we're going to have really a very beleaguered, undereducated, population that will take our state in a not very promising direction. Not to be embracing hyperbole, but really, I do believe that's what's at stake, and we can do this. We know what to do. The research tells us how to intervene. The research shows us how we can make up ground, and we can with resources, support, and commitment.
Thank you.
Okay. I've got a question for Mr. Singh. Over the past year, we've seen teachers make dramatic changes in the ways they do their jobs. Many teachers have told me about the challenges they've had with teaching in person and online at the same time, and trying to keep students engaged using different platforms than they're used to using. Can you tell us a bit about how you adapted this year, and also what your sense is of how your colleagues and students are doing in general?
Yeah, so definitely it wasn't something that came with a handbook for sure. Me personally, I guess I can speak more so on myself. It was a huge learning curve on, okay, if I'm assigning this much work and it typically takes this long to do in the classroom setting, how long is it going to take for them to do online without me monitoring it with them at home? So that was something definitely I had to take into account. And it was a big school-wide talk that we had to have. The principal, Ray Borden, was very good and on top of coming up with a bunch of change ideas. And so even the structure of the online format, where for the first 50 minutes, we would be in an asynchronous setting, the expectation being that students were going online and working through the modules that we were setting in our learning mastering system. And then we would meet with them for the remainder 50 minutes. I think as we progressed, we learned more and more of just the nature of the beast of online learning, where our expectation was students would wake up at 7:30, be very fresh and ready to learn on their own, go through these modules. Slowly we learned, okay, they're waking up, they're probably not attacking it with the intent that we're hoping they are, right? And it's that whole reality versus ideology. Ideally we do want them to be on top of everything, but the reality was sinking in. So we changed up the way we would deliver the actual instruction, via a 25, 50 minute, 25 split, a lecture and guide them first 25 minutes. And it really helped with capturing the students and motivating them in that regard. And really, it's something that, for me personally, what I realized was things that worked in the classroom probably weren't going to be working in the online setting. For instance, doing group work, I would send them off into small groups, and it was hit or miss because a lot of the students are very shy for whatever reason in the online setting. They didn't want to have their videos on. They were very hesitant to talk, and it's just a different setting. And so I personally realized if I split them up into their own little groups and I cycled through and talked one-on-one with each of them, it was a lot more effective to gauge their understanding. They're a lot more willing in terms of participation versus having them in groups, large group settings, or asking them in general. So it was a big trial and error all the way through. But I think there's so many tools that we've really gained from this entire experience. Everyone is now proficient in Canvas. That was the learning mastering system that we used. Everyone's proficient in using video questions. Everyone's very proficient at using online video call. And there's a lot of pluses we can take and add into and integrate into our next year with that. And that's what I'm personally looking forward to.
Okay. And Dr. Hernandez, you touched on this, but I wonder if you can tell us what all this means in terms of preparing students at the collegiate level for a COVID and post-COVID world. What has to change in the ways you're training teachers and kind of the world you're letting them loose into?
Yeah, I think it has enormous implications for educator preparation programs. And here's what I will share with you is that as I talk with teachers and I talk with our faculty here and deans across the country, I keep hearing the same thing, that teachers experienced enormous amount of isolation during COVID. And for the most part, their working conditions were working alone, trying to solve the challenges of teaching students, engaging parents, managing all the technology. In my eyes, I think they did the best that they could, and I think they are heroes in this pandemic, along with first responders and medical personnel. But one of the things that I keep thinking about with my dean colleagues across the country as a result of COVID and this isolation is, why do we continue to think about one teacher and one classroom? Why is it that we expect teachers to know and be able to do everything in a classroom? This is the way we've been training them for 100 years. We need to challenge this sort of widget teacher mindset that suggests that a teacher can be placed in any district across the state, in any school, in any classroom, and they will excel. I'm not sure if that's the mindset that we should take. I think we should really think deeply about how can we challenge that status quo? And so as I think about the lessons of COVID, and I think what we need to do is approach teacher preparation as a workforce development challenge. And this is what I mean by this, is how can we train teachers to specialize in expert fields of study like literacy and math? And I'm talking about elementary school teachers who work with other adults in teacher teams, meeting the personalized and individual needs of our students. We need to reimagine how we can train teachers and also challenge this notion that they're, they are in private practice in their classrooms. As you think about how the medical field managed over COVID, engineers, attorneys, other kinds of sectors, they all worked in teams, working together to support each other. And so I think we need to be able to think about how can we think about the way we train teachers in the future. And I'll end with this. We need to take those lessons. We need to challenge the status quo. We need to really think, why do we keep training teachers the way that we do? And if we brought them together working in high-performing teams, provided them specialized instruction around literacy and math, we heard the numbers, right? We need experts in those fields. I really think that we should graduate experts who can really enter schools with this distributed expertise around content. And I believe that's one way to accelerate learning and to counter the isolations that teachers are experiencing in schools and really do good by our students. And so those are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about with our faculty and with deans across the country as we think about what needs to change around preparation of teachers.
Great. And Mr. Singh, kind of the same question. If you could give a piece of advice to someone who runs a teacher preparation program to help their students deal with the world that you've been living in for more than a year now, what would it be?
Personally, what helped me really get through the year itself was a lot of empathy, really understanding that there's things that students are going through, or even teachers themselves are going through that maybe I haven't gone through it personally, but it needs to be considered. Grace was one of the things that if I did not give grace to the students, to myself, and to everyone at every level of all of this that was involved, that everyone's just trying their best. We've never gone through a pandemic. And, even going forward, I think it was mentioned that we need to really assess what's the best course of action. And that doesn't necessarily mean what's the fastest course of action, right? And so understanding grace and empathy, those are the things that have really gotten me through this year. And I've seen it on my students. They've mentioned multiple times how thankful they were that I did take those things into consideration. And granted, we need to have high expectations. It is something that the students need to know they're in the school to learn. That is something that they are expected to do, is perform at a higher level. But know that we're there for them. We're rooting them on while they're doing all of this. We're not somebody that's in the way of them learning and becoming what they want to become, but rather we're the ones encouraging and promoting that growth.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Singh. And we have a question from Yolanda Rodella specifically asking what people can do to help students get over this past year and the effect that's had on everyone. And I'm going to assume this is from a parent perspective. We may circle back to this later from a community perspective, but if you're a parent of a student, how can you help them get past this year and the effect it's had on folks? And Dr. Brands, I'm not sure if you might be able to tackle that one a little bit from what you've seen.
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time this year talking about the dire situation that kids and families are in. And from my perspective, it is time that we shift that mindset to thinking about setting our expectations high for kids and approaching this recovery as we come back into this fall from an actions-oriented perspective. We need to stop being critical and being overly pessimistic, but really stand up and say, how can we be determined and disciplined and stand up in the leadership positions that we have to bring forth actionable solutions? And this is not a statement to mitigate the big challenges that we have ahead, but it is the reality that this will require both swift action and sustainable approaches for the long haul. And we have seen some great examples of this across our community in the last year. We have seen districts partner with cities to put in historic Wi-Fi plans. Tarrant County, former Mayor Betsy Price worked with Fort Worth ISD superintendent on an initiative like this. We have seen our state legislature that has upheld House Bill 3. If we can remember all the way back to the beginning of this session when there were big concerns about the budget in Texas, and then piled on top of that, we had a winter weather crisis to overcome. And I just give those as examples of, in the midst of these things, like our state legislator found a way to get a win for kids by upholding those dollars to House Bill 3. And the other thing too that we would be remiss if we forgot in our state of Texas as a huge win is that schools were open as an option for families this year across our state, where that was not the case across many and most of the states in our nation, where families did not have that option of sending their kids in person. So I just really think as we kind of go into this year, and I'm going to circle all the way back in a very long way to the question about the parent perspective, is that across our community and parents too, we really need to be conveying a message to our children of hope and optimism and resilience. And it's time for action, and that we can do this at all levels of leadership, from our students to our teachers, to our principals, to the leaders that are speaking here today.
Thank you, Dr. Brands. And you mentioned some of this, institutional response to what's been going on. I'd like to hear from folks about, how how you feel school systems have responded to address COVID learning loss. I think schools were pretty quick to adjust to the idea of getting to online learning and things like that. They flipped that switch very quickly, last year. But, the program you mentioned, Dr. Brands, about the towers, that's not coming online for a year and a half after COVID started. And we were doing an editorial board interview with a school board member here in Fort Worth in April. And at that time, that school board member said the board had not yet been presented with any kind of comprehensive plan of how to address COVID learning loss. So talk to us a little bit about that response and the challenges the school system faces and your assessment of it. Secretary Spellings, I'd be interested to hear from you on this one.
Well, I really want to build on the Dean's great point about, we keep doing things the same old way and expecting a different result. And this is an opportunity for us to really get, as I like to say, organized for success. That if our expectation is high levels of achievement and confidence in our kids and each other, and I really want to echo what Elizabeth just said about kind of our attitude going forward. But, why do we do the things that we're doing? We're so bureaucratic and time, we don't think very creatively about the variables of how we deploy our personnel, our educators. We ask them to do, be all things to all people everywhere, every day. That's ridiculous. We don't think about time in ways that are facile. We don't think about resources in targeted ways to the extent that we need to, and on and on. So I think COVID has been a shockwave that will allow us to really be more expansive in our thinking about innovation. Clearly, broadband and tech is one of those pieces, but let's think about how we can best deploy our people, our human capital, our teachers, our educators, how we best channel the involvement of parents how we best target resources around the greatest needs, something we have a very hard time doing in education, and how we think about using new ways of assessing and holding our schools and ourselves accountable for the achievement of every child.
And as part of that, do I hear you saying, can we make our school systems, our educational systems more nimble? Is it too much like turning the Titanic now?
Absolutely.
When we address
That's
this?
absolutely true.
How on earth do we do that?
I mean, we think of things in terms of minutes in the day and number of hours, and whether it's preparation or whether it's education of students. It's very, very bureaucratic, hidebound, and compliance oriented. And I think we've, I see my teacher friend shaking his hand there. Let's kind of unleash the kind of creativity that I know we can bring to bear.
Dr. Brands, your kind of assessment about how the school systems have responded here in Fort Worth and the challenges and the things they've done right, things maybe that they were a little slow on.
Yeah, when Read Fort Worth was founded, we were a pretty tight mission on literacy. But in the last year, we have really tried to evolve that scope to say, how are we standing up issues that are critical for kids across Tarrant County and in particular in Fort Worth ISD? And, kind of getting back to the question, Steve, of starting with the, school board member or constituent who hadn't heard the ESSER funding, that is changing this month. As since that conversation, the state has informed districts of how they can receive those federal dollars. The state legislature has confirmed that House Bill $3 are up and active again for districts to draw down. And every school district across our state this month will be presenting to their school boards in public formats for all constituents to, participate in what their plans are for those dollars as school budgets are due this month. So I think there is, there is no other way to look at this year than to say that school district employees at all levels, whether it's leadership levels or principal levels or teacher level, they stood up in unprecedented ways to shift a education system that since its founding was about kids in desks in classrooms, and evolve that on a dime to turn kitchen counters and living rooms and couches into places of instruction. So I think there is really no other way to look at this year than to say that it was a Herculean effort across educators across our state to really stand up with a big heart for what kids needed to make sure that they were being responsive to this moment. And that those same leaders are going to need our support going into next year, as comments have been made today that, in Tarrant County, we still have about half of our kids who have opted to learn remotely this entire year. And so those kids are going to be returning to schools in the fall, not having set foot in a classroom since, March, I'm going to get the exact date wrong, but first half of March in 2019. So that too is the reality of what we're looking at coming this fall.
Thank you. Dr. Hernandez, jump in on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we have worked very closely with the Fort Worth Independent School District this past year. And one of the things that's promising that I think they're really thinking through is the totality of the need. So it's not just about, learning loss, but it's about parent guardians. It's about other kinds of things. So one of the areas that I think are really promising is, their focus on just the increased instructional time. How do we rethink summer school? How do we rethink after school education? How do we maximize and accelerate the learning of our students? What instructional support do our teachers and our students need as we think about the instruction in their classroom, particularly the new teachers that are going to be coming on board very soon? Someone addressed this earlier, but the social emotional learning needs of our students. How is it that we can provide the kind of counseling that we need to so that students feel comfortable, students feel like they belong, and they're learning? And then finally, the Fort Worth schools, I think, have made a commitment to engaging parents and community members in this work as well. And so I think those are good strategies, and I think we need to continue to work as partners and really think through how do these things get played out, where do we need to continue to adjust, and really trying to turn, as you said, this big ship around that sometimes seems impossible. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We just need to keep working together, I think.
So we know that Texas has received billions of dollars in federal stimulus money to help schools deal with the kinds of challenges we're talking about here. Dr. Brands, how should that money be used locally? And do you know of any early indicators or data that might help them make those decisions?
Yeah. Well, everything that we are looking at and working with school districts on from how to spend those dollars is driven by data that is locally informed data, looking at the individual needs of distinct school districts. There are absolutely evidence-based practices out there across our nation and across our state of Texas that we know will work. But we also know that the application of those practices to the local context is really what the secret sauce of any program or initiative, whether it's a new program or something that you're scaling and growing. So I say all that just to really double down on the importance of how we are using the local data of each school district, even of each school, to really be thoughtful about how these dollars are being spent that maximize the impact that they will have on supporting students within our communities. Everything too that we are looking at with these dollars, I would bucket into kind of one big heading of moving to action, and this theme of how are we moving to action with optimism and determination and setting expectations high for our kids. And number one, we need to think about, and I've already alluded to this, investing in data and evidence-informed solutions for each local school district. Some of the things that we have seen in this category with data to support that they will work is additional instructional time for students whom the data shows would most benefit from additional instructional time throughout the year. When we look at attendance data across the county, kids who miss just 10% of school score 60% lower on literacy and math assessments. And this suggests that there are groups of kids for whom more instruction would boost their academic outcomes. We also have to invest in our teachers. I just can't say this enough. Our teachers are our real life superheroes, and research supports this as well, as teachers are the strongest school-related factor to a child's success. And again, kind of going back to this theme of looking at the data at local school districts and local schools, what could be those menu of professional certificates that a school district can allow a teacher to choose that benefits that student population? For example, we have districts in Tarrant County that have 34, 36, 40% of the kids that are ELL or ESL learners. How can we offer for those teachers with the dollars available the option of getting a professional certificate in that category? Similar with students who are dyslexic or gifted and talented. How can we boost the professional capacity of our teachers in ways that supports the unique student population of kids in those schools and in those districts? How can we double down in things like literacy and math, which Secretary Spellings gave data at the beginning of kind of where we are in the state of Texas? And how can we build strong and resilient families? I mean, if anybody knows the value of teaching and school more so than our parents, when every classroom and every kitchen became a classroom last spring and this fall, we should never again underestimate the value that families play in the role of educating our children. And how can we make sure that those voices are really lifted up in the solutions that we're bringing forward, again, both in the immediacy and these long haul, multiple year strategies that are going to need to be put in place, as there aren't going to be quick solutions. There's going to be a combination of things that we see implemented soon and over the long haul. And the other thing that we really need to be thinking about in response to this question is how are we investing in the infrastructure for sustainability? We absolutely need to be thinking about partnerships in new ways. And I have countless examples of that, including working with Dean Hernandez, who's a colleague on this panel today, to think about how can we rethink what the teacher preparation pipeline looks like to educate the next generation of teachers that we're going to need for our kids. And districts need to remember that they can't do this alone. There are experts out there in strategic areas, whether it is thinking about that districts can bring in to help boost the capacity and give the community confidence in how these dollars are being spent. And the evaluation systems around what happens over the next year will also be critical, as we're thinking about how we can use data to inform what is working, what we need to double down in, and where we need to evolve. And thinking about how we are evaluating not just the state evaluation systems that are already in place, but the local evaluation systems within individual districts and individual school patterns that are saying what's working for this student population in real time, so that we can have constant, continuous improvement and evolution of what the data is informing us is working best for our kids.
And Secretary Spellings, districts have 3 years to spend this ESSER money. What kinds of long-term projects do you think we need to see statewide to not just solve the problem in the immediate term, but follow through?
Well, I want to build on what Elizabeth just said, which I heartily agree with, and that is that we have to understand what the data tells us and base our remedies, our solutions, our cures, our prescriptions on that data. So I was very much in despair when I saw our Texas House of Representatives eliminate this did not pass the full legislature, but eliminate any assessment beyond that which was required by the federal government, and also eliminate all social studies and science assessment. We also know that the legislature did pass legislation that will not require any school to be rated until late summer of 2023. So we're going to have less information, not more, which is why local efforts around data and understanding what the problems are, what needs that triage kind of attitude. Now, some of those long-term solutions and should be, first of all, let's learn a lot from this pandemic. This isn't necessarily the last one we're going to have, and how can we understand what the implications are and how we triage, how we intervene. Data will guide the way. And of course, as Elizabeth also just said, and the Dean knows well as a leader in Deans for Impact, an important organization in our nation, that we do know what to do. We know how to intervene and accelerate. We know how to close achievement gaps in reading and math in particular. And as she said, too often there's not that fidelity of implementation in our at the local level. So let's make sure that our expectations are such that those research-based practices are brought to bear. We continue to care enough to find out and have that transparency so that we don't squander this amazing opportunity that we have with a tremendous amount of resources. No longer will money be an excuse for a lack of performance. We have the ball. We need to run with it.
I'll jump onto a little bit of a different topic here. COVID learning loss hits at a time when many schools, probably most schools, are already dealing with achievement gaps with certain groups of students. So how does this affect that? Is magnified, and what do we need to be doing to address that? Mr. Singh, how have you seen this play out in the classroom? I mean, no doubt you see these groups of students and work with these students who may already be behind or have a gap. How has this played out in this scenario?
I think one thing the pandemic did was kind of move the veil of inequity out of the way. And so you really got to see where students who were underperforming, they're in the classroom, you could reach them, you could make a difference because you have that daily contact. Now they're thrusted into an online environment, and they're in a home where they might only have one piece of technology. They might have to work to support their family or be the babysitter in their family. I'm a child of an immigrant, so I know what it was like to have both of my parents working at the same time while having to babysit my brother and sister and juggle so many other things that school wasn't necessarily always the number one thing on my mind in order to survive and make it to the next day. And so I think the inequity that the best way to really reach them, one thing that my school did really well, the admin team put this together, was something called Parent University. And so they reached out to the parents because they understood that, okay, we're giving them what the student's performance is, with the grade blast or whatever it is, But if the parent doesn't know how to access that technology, whether it's a language barrier or they're just not familiar with navigating those things, they're not always user friendly in terms of the UI layout. They help them go through, okay, this is how you can monitor your child's progress. This is how you can tell. A lot of them were taking the word of their child. Okay, did you do the work today? They're like, yeah. And it's like, okay, I did it, they told me they did it, so they must have done it. But the parent university was really, really a well thought out plan that we implemented on my campus. And so there's a lot of ways we can help in regards to that. But I think it really, truly did highlight that there are different backgrounds for every single student and teacher and everybody else in that building whenever they show up. And those things need to be taken into consideration. And it doesn't mean slowing down the ones that have 3-4 laptops in their home and they've got the fastest Wi-Fi, but really how do we make it to where we can close that gap where the students who are coming from a bit of a more adverse background, what can we give them? What is it exactly that they need? And we can, the research and everything, what is it that shows that, okay, if we give them their own hotspot, if we give them more technology, or if we give them more time in the classroom, maybe I think it was mentioned that even a longer school period for those certain students, what is it that we can do so we can close that gap, or at least minimize or, hopefully mitigate it.
Thank you. And I want to send this question that's come in from a reader to you as well, Mr. Singh, and maybe up to some others afterwards. This is Sonia Warren Williams, who's a retired music teacher. She stayed home to assist her own children with virtual learning. Past year, she asked, what are your thoughts on how schools can encourage parents to participate more in their child's learning? Mr. Singh, from your perspective on that as a teacher?
I think it was very interesting because being in the online setting where teachers were having to teach and all of a sudden the parent was in the classroom because they're in the background, they can hear and see what it is that teachers are saying. I think they should be a lot more mindful in terms of all of the resources that they have available to them, that they can easily access and check those grades. They can easily access and check what it was that they did that day through the learning mastering system or whatever piece of technology is available. And they don't physically, I guess there's this, I guess when I picture parent involvement, traditionally it was the parent coming to the school, meeting the teacher, being a part of the PTSA, all physically. But a lot of those things can be done now online, but it's a matter of them knowing what they have access to. And so that's where I mentioned the parent university that we did at my school, where parents were able to come after school or even attend via online. So that way they got a sense of what it is that their students are having to navigate through to in order to participate in the actual classroom setting. They get to learn a little bit more there, and they get to see that it's not something that takes more than a minute. I mean, to open up whatever website it is to check your child's grade isn't something that's going to require 20, 30, 40 minutes of your day or an hour. It's something they can do within 5 minutes. And I think that's a good selling point on that in terms of involvement.
Fantastic. And got another question here from a reader. I'll just throw it to the group and let someone jump in who has thought on it. Danielle Sanchez asks or says, for some reason as kids, would anyone like to address the unique challenges faced by students with disabilities during school? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'll jump in and just say, I think we know the data tells us that there is no population that has suffered more and has really had to be more challenged than that population, because they are so benefited by contact with an adult, contact with a teacher, often in a very small setting, the exact same things that went away very dramatically. It placed a huge burden on parents as advocates. I think we saw lots of gaps in what the federal law requires us to do to the benefit of special needs students and what was actually happening. And so, again, I think it's a place that we need to more fully understand what happened and what can be done in a place where I was just made aware of an innovation where through technology, nurse practitioners are working with special needs students? I mean, we need to start to kind of break the mold. Is it going to be better than, one-on-one direct support by a teacher? No. But is it better than nothing, which I think too frequently happened in our state this past year? Absolutely.
Fantastic. Anyone else on the panel have a thought on that one before we move on?
Yeah,
Dr.
I'll just add really quickly that we have to shy away from this one size fits all and really allow the data, as my colleagues have said, to really drive the needs of our students so that we are individualizing and personalizing what it is that they need. I think community-based organizations and the faith-based community is underutilized in our communities. These are community-based organizations sometimes connect with our students in some ways better than our schools do. And so part of the strategy has to be who should be involved, how often, how can we partner? And I think we need to engage classroom teachers early and often on what they think the strategy should be as well, in addition to policymakers and school leaders and community leaders and those sort of things. So that's what I would add to that conversation about meeting the needs of students.
Thank you. And we've talked about how parents can help here. And no doubt a lot of folks on this panel discussion today watching and listening are parents or educators. But to people who aren't that in the community, who may want to get involved in education and helping with this problem, how can they be and why should they be in terms of addressing this issue? Dr. Brands, are there ways for people to get involved here in Fort Worth if they're not a teacher or they're not a principal, or how can they get involved?
Absolutely. And I said earlier, tackling this challenge can be done. And if it's going to be done anywhere, it's going to be done in Fort Worth. And in Tarrant County and in the counties all across Texas. I have never been more encouraged by leaders that have stood up in the face of this last year, and have countless examples that would take the whole hour that we had today to talk about, how that has happened. And all that is to emphasize that there is a role for everybody to play in being a part of the solution as we move to action. So 3 specifics that I will lay out. Number 1, there are just some families that it is most beneficial to literally meet them where they are. If you are a fellow teacher on this call, you all know that saying of meeting kids where they are if you want to take them to where you want them to go. And in this context, that might be their front porches. And so Read Fort Worth is mobilizing hundreds of people to visit the homes of students for whom we might not have had the contact, enrollment, or interaction with over the last year, to remove the barriers that they may be facing to returning to school. Maybe those are barriers related to academics or concerns about the health and safety of their children, questions that they might still have about the COVID virus and how they can keep their families safe. And so we would encourage anybody who wants to be a part of that. There's a phone call option. There's an actual visiting of the front porches. And we are partnering with our ISDs to make this happen, in particular Fort Worth ISD. The second thing that I would say is parents need to hear critical messages from people that they trust. And one of those groups across every neighborhood in our state is our faith-based leaders. And a message that we have really been uplifting is how can we, across our state of Texas, across Tarrant County, have a message of back to school sermon Sunday on Sunday, August 1st, from every pulpit across Texas to encourage and welcome families back to school this fall. So if that is something too that our faith-based leaders or neighborhoods or members of different faith communities are interested in, Read Fort Worth wants to be a resource to you on that. And the third thing I will say, and again, this is really kind of addressing more of those long-term solutions, is, and it's connecting to the theme of everybody has a role to play in being a part of the solution here. Whether you are a teacher, a parent, a student, a community partner, a business, is you can register your support to be an education ally and a champion for kids on the Read Fort Worth website. And we're going to build a coalition of these allies to hear their voices that help inform solutions alongside the data that we have as we are investing in kind of a multiple year, a long haul approach to innovation and really individualizing the solutions that we're bringing forth across our unique districts, across our unique schools, and across our unique student populations.
Fantastic. Some great opportunities there. Unfortunately, we're getting down toward the end of our time together. But before we close, I'd be interested in hearing from everyone on the panel on this question. You know, we've talked about this challenge, and it is daunting, and it is large, and may seem overwhelming in some cases. But what has you hopeful about the path forward in the year ahead? Mr. Singh, we'll start with you. When you and I talked before this panel discussion, you said you're very excited about the coming school year. What are you hopeful about?
Honestly, one thing I mentioned was the learning mastering system. So everything's already laid out for my courses I've taught. All I'm going to be doing is going in, tweaking based on needs. And so I feel like I can spend a lot more time, particularly in my course, chemistry, setting up labs, doing more group investigation and discussions, rather than focusing so much on them doing homework in the classroom or doing problems in the classroom. I now know that every student who was affected by this, there was a negative effect for sure, but all of them now know how to get their homework online. All of them now know, at least for the most part, with guidance, where their resources are, how they, when I was in the classroom, one thing I continually told them was, you guys are, it might seem like a disadvantage, but all of a sudden you guys are now thrusted into what typically students feel when they're thrusted into the college setting. That jump from high school to college is, whoa, I don't have a teacher telling me to do my homework anymore, or I don't understand this, but no one's here to tell me directly. I can't go to someone. And so now all of a sudden they're in this setting and they've gained the skills on researching online independently, how they can access their work, how time management. That was a crucial thing. I think students did not realize they decided to take 1 or 2 days off of doing their work. All of a sudden it starts to proliferate there. This work starts to pile up. So that's where the grace comes in. This is the first time they're high school students, they're middle school students, they're elementary students. They've never had to be this independent. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Those are skills that we can now work on that much more in this new setting. So I'm very hopeful. Also, personally, now if a student needs tutoring or help outside the classroom, they're not just limited by the classroom. Now I can be like, okay, hop onto Teams, hop onto Zoom, hop onto this video setting, and as long as it's within the time frame, because that's something that I needed to practice. Was I was answering questions at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3. That's the time that the teenagers decided to be up and do their work. I had to learn on my own too, time management outside of work hours. But helping them in that virtual setting now is a plus.
Fantastic. Dr. Hernandez, briefly as we reach the end of our time here, what has you hopeful as we go forward?
Yeah, I've been able to engage with elementary students, middle school and high school students. And when I talk to them, they are ready to go to school. They're motivated, they're curious, they want to get back with their teachers, they want to be back together with their friends. And that's what I'm hopeful about, is that they're ready. We just need to be ready for them, and our schools need to be ready for them. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Fantastic. Dr. Brands, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I am hopeful by what I have seen in terms of leadership across over the last year at all levels. If we are going to recover our kids, it is going to happen in Texas. This is the place where we can get it done. And I have just seen leaders, whether it is community partners at nonprofits who have evolved and innovated from in-person programming to mobile food pantries and mobile school buses, to principals and teachers who have done driving caravans to visit the homes of their children, to organizations that have shifted to say, how can we bring the services that we provided, to kids and families where they are. All of that gives me hope that we are poised and positioned to come back stronger and come out the other side of this stronger than ever before. So I have nothing but optimism as we go into next year, that we have the leadership we need across our states, in our school districts, and in so many of our schools and classrooms across the state of Texas, that is poised and ready to come out of this stronger and better for our kids, and that they are ready to overcome the challenges as they come back. And quite frankly, to some of the challenges that we don't yet have our eyes on, as so many kids have not been in classrooms over the last year. but that these leaders will step up and innovate and evolve to meet the needs of our kids across our state.
Oh, thank you so much. And Secretary Stallings, we're just about up on an hour, but hopeful signs from your end.
I'll be very quick. I'm hopeful because there are people like the ones on this panel that care deeply about it and are going to be on the battlefield. I'm hopeful because we have lots of resources that'll be deployed that we can really pull up and really build on the momentum and the optimism. I'm hopeful because no one will take school for granted anymore. Kids are dying to get back with their friends, their peers. Teachers are dying to collaborate with other educators, and of course our families are fully ready to make sure that our schools are fully functioning. I'm very optimistic, and as has been said by others on this panel, if anybody can do it, Texas can, because we have the want to, we have the wherewithal, we have the courage and the resiliency, and I know we will.
Thank you so much. Well, as we wrap up here, I'd like to thank each of our panelists for your thoughtful commitment to this time together. I know you all have busy schedules, and I'm just very grateful for your time with us today. And I thank you for what you all do to make a difference in our community. To those watching, I encourage you to follow Silas's work as he explores the many challenges faced by Fort Worth public school systems, as well as the solutions to those challenges. We also have a new reporter coming on board just this week, Isaac Wines, who just joined us, and he will be delving in specifically to issues around early childhood education. So I encourage you to follow both Silas and Isaac's work in the Star-Telegram. Silas's work is funded by the Sid W. Richardson Foundation. Isaac's work is funded by the Morris Foundation. We're grateful for their support. The Star-Telegram wants to be a strong voice as we navigate these and other challenges and opportunities in our communities together. If you're a subscriber to the Star-Telegram, thank you. You help make all this possible and make what we do possible. If you're not a subscriber, I would humbly ask you to consider doing so. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great evening.